As you can tell, I'm not really comfortable as a speaker, not yet anyway. However, mainly my vehicle is literary. However, I want to put the starter video up there on my fundraiser. And, well, what's the fundraiser for? Okay. Well, it's called the Flow Fellowship. And here's the address, fundraiser, it's fundrazr.com/Flow Fellowship. So what's flow? Well, years ago I had it in mind. It stood for, I was very focused on liberty at the time. It stood for Fellowship for Liberation of Our World. I wrote a brochure and a booklet at the time. In fact, Flow Fellowship, here we are. This is back in 2008, and this is part of a series, actually part of the Sacred Nonaggression Principle, which is a book I wrote. And this is a chapter called Non-Aggression Faith. So basically, it was broad strokes for a spiritual movement for people who like liberty. Well, today I've developed that idea a little more thoroughly. And my background is, pretty ordinary, middle class, kind of an idyllic, leave it to beaver childhood, really. So there weren't too many issues and not much drama when I was growing up. I didn't become an independent until quite a bit. Well, I was early, but through the public schools and so forth, you kind of learn to conform, and I had pretty much kind of conformed until we moved to Oklahoma City, which kind of jarred me. And there I read a book when I was in junior high. I read James Michener's novel about the failed 1950s revolution against Russian or USSR tyranny, called The Bridget Andal, and that really just shook me up. And I certainly didn't want. I certainly became an enemy of communism at that point. Then, ironically, I encountered a little book from I say ironically because you wouldn't call Oklahoma City a real intellectual oasis, to put it mildly, about Barry Goldwater by Stephen Shattuck. Well, Barry Goldwater, from my school teachers, they were always kind of putting him down as like, he's a radical kind of guy, and we don't believe in that anymore. We're all together and all friendly and everything. Anyway, I read his book called Freedom is His Flight Plan, which really jarred my weekly reader socialist worldview, that we had more or less been indoctrinated with in junior high. And then up through high school, really. But pretty much I can remember that from my late grade school years and then into junior high, we got this weekly reader, and it was like it came from the United Nations or something. Anyhow, so after that, I really kind of turned into an individualist kind of guy, and I read a lot. Always read a lot since first grade. But anyway, I read Ayn Rand, Anthem, We the Living, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. I read in high school, and then in my prime time adult years, my early adult years, I grew through the libertarian movement, and I was leader in the libertarian movement. Then I kind of fell out of grace with that in 2004 at the National Convention in Atlanta, and I went to the Free State Project, which is New Hampshire, and that was 15 years ago, and I had to bounce back from that just because of life circumstances. But while there, I did start my own writing, editing, and publishing career. And I'm in my early 50s, I'm in mid-50s, I guess. So my magnum opus to this point, and I consider myself a writer, certainly a liberty activist, and my magnum opus to this point is a hybrid novel. I say hybrid because it's partly fiction and partly nonfiction, but it's called The Truman Prophecy. Subtitle is Rise of the Independents. So there you are. If you throw in spiritual cultivation, you have what I'm calling flow now. And we live in a world, I think, that's just been growing terminally corrupt, if it isn't already. Humanity in general is the target of sinister forces of control, magnified by consensus reality of people that are just going along with it. It's a new form of tyranny, and not to mention the wholesale assaults of these individuals. Here's my kitty. Say hi, Kaylee. All right. Not to mention the wholesale assaults of these on the resources that sustain us. Some say to the point of imminent extinction. And so we need this flow living. I call it a way of being, a living activist philosophy, and a fellowship of kindred souls of independence to gain or regain our psychological independence as human beings. And then by shedding the collective outer collar that we endure, as well as our own inner collar of compulsive reactive noise mind, as I call it. So flow has three aspects. It has spiritual cultivation, independent consciousness, and American first principles. And that really entails people's independent grand juries, and it goes back to the Declaration of Independence.